Hello, I'm Leslie Cook, lead mortgage reporter at Money, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar titled Change Agents, How Today's Largest Generation Group is Shaping the Housing Market. With us today, we have a panel of mortgage and lending industry experts. We'll start with Tony Thompson, the founder and CEO of NAMBA. That's the National Association of Minority Mortgage Bankers of America. Welcome, Tony, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Leslie, for having me.
We're also pleased to be joined by Miriam Moore, Division President at ServiceLink. Hello, Miriam.
Hello, Leslie. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Thanks. And Dave Howard, Executive Vice President at ServiceLink. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Leslie. Great to be with y'all today.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for being here today and looking forward to having a great conversation with all of you. Throughout today's webinar, we'll be discussing some of the findings of ServiceLink's 2022 State of Home Buying Report. The report features timely data from a survey of 1,000 homeowners who purchased a home within the past 5 years. The survey was conducted to uncover data and generational trends among recent homebuyers, their attitudes towards alternative paths to homeownership, and the role technology plays throughout the process. Today's focus will be on key generational findings, particularly among the Gen Z millennial demographic. But before we begin, here are a few ways that you can participate during today's presentation, as well as some housekeeping items. I'd like to quickly mention that today's webinar is being recorded and you are currently in a listen-only mode. We will have a question and answer session at the end of today's conversation. You may type into the Q&A pane on the left portion of your screen. We also have some resources available for you to download and view. You can click on the resource widget at the bottom right of your screen to check them out. Now, let's get into the key findings of the report. At a high level, the State of Home Buying Report found that Gen Z millennials will continue to play a big role in the housing market throughout 2022. 26% of this group say they plan to buy a home this year, and 23% say they would purchase a home without seeing it in person first. So let's go directly to our first question. How has the pandemic impacted the home buying decision of the millennial generation? Dave, would you like to start us off with this one?
Sure. Thanks, Leslie. I would say, quite frankly, it's accelerated it, right? So since the onset of the pandemic and the advent of work from home, it's really put a strain on millennials as it relates to space and what they require from what they're calling home. And so the pandemic has forced us to really rethink how we do our work, how we live, what's important to us going forward. And many companies today are continuing a work from home posture, and has created a new dynamic in the home for millennials around what is required for work from home, but just living space in general, which has created demand in the housing on the housing front for us.
Tony, do you think how do you think the pandemic has impacted from the lender's side?
Well, certainly from the lender side, I think what we've seen the most as it relates to the millennial home buying population, Leslie, is their need and really their desire to leverage social media, leverage the internet more aggressively as it relates to understanding their home search process, as well as trying to identify who they would work with as a lender, as well as who they would choose from a real estate to support them and represent them on that real estate transaction.
What is the primary motivating factor for members of this generation when it comes to a home purchase? Maybe, Miriam, you'd like to start us off with this question.
Sure, Leslie. As Dave mentioned, they're looking for more space. Millennials are looking to upsize. The trend to have more remote office workers has meant that these millennials are looking for more space to, for example, have an office in their primary residences. And so they need that more space, and that's what the home buying report indicated. And what's interesting is that the millennials are really the ones that are primarily purchasing properties these days. For a long time, it was said that millennials weren't looking to purchase a home, but year to date, they represent 43% of the home buyers this year. So it's a really big number, and they're really out there buying homes.
And Tony, has NAMBA seen an influx of millennial buyers coming in over the last couple of years as well?
Yes, certainly. We know that over the last years, from what we've seen in our data that we do as well on an annual report highlighting millennial home purchases, we know and understand that there's a need and a desire for more millennials to not just own a home, but to actually be in a location that is closer to family and friends. And so as a result of the pandemic and as we move into a post buying opportunity, we are seeing a shift where many millennials are looking to purchase a home that is more closely to other family and friends versus maybe living in an urban core area.
Makes sense. And how does the way millennials choose to buy a home differ from other generations or even from previous years? Dave, maybe you can get us going with this.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I'd say the way I would describe the way millennials are choosing to buy or participate in purchase, I say is technology-driven and agent-assisted. And so I know we'll talk a little further in the session around the importance of education and the front end of the process there, but they're really more reliant than the other generations have been on technology. Yet they still do work with agents for expertise and guidance. In fact, our study showed that 12% of those millennial buyers executed a virtual inspection, which was at least, I believe, 30% plus more than Gen X and baby boomers as well. And a further 9% of those went on to purchase a home completely sight unseen. So they're leveraging technology in their process and in their execution, all the way from research to closing.
Leslie, I think another important trend that we've seen to note around the customer journey, particularly as it relates to millennials, in a recent survey that Cultural Outreach did, which is a part of the NAMBA family of companies, in 2021, we surveyed over 1,100 millennials who had financed a home. And what we saw was an amazing trend on how they started that home search journey, where out of that survey, 92% of the respondents actually indicated they started their survey on YouTube as it relates to learn about the home buying process, to learn about what it takes to purchase a home and everything that goes into that home buying process. They decided to go to YouTube to start and initiate that search, and then follow from YouTube onto Instagram to begin to learn more about lenders and the real estate agents in their local communities whom they were looking at or thinking about reaching out to inquire about owning a home. And what that said to me was that there's a paradigm shift that lenders need to begin to think about in how they communicate and how they engage and connect with the future buying demographic, which is obviously the millennials and also Gen Z.
Following up on that, Tony, what should lenders do to respond to the needs of the millennial generation, or how can they respond to the needs of the millennial generation?
I think one of the other surprising outcomes of this survey that Cultural Outreach performed was that in addition to millennials acknowledging that journey or starting that journey from an education standpoint within YouTube, they also, 28%, indicated that at the end of their transaction that they had trusted their lender did the right thing. And so what that indicates when you look at that statistic, it says that as a lending community, we have to begin to look at how do we connect and engage with this audience to build and establish trust and educate them and present ourselves as that trusted advisor before we're looking to actually do business with them. And so many lenders will need to think about how do they look at marketing to this generation, particularly the multicultural generation from a millennial standpoint, understand their needs, and then most importantly, present their brand in such a way where it is first engaging and focused on educating and making aware to millennials all the different processes and steps involved in the home buying process.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, buying a home at auction has always been popular with investors. However, the findings of the report suggest that 55% of the Gen Z millennial generation either has or is willing to buy a property at auction. Miriam, I know you have a lot to do with the auction sections of the market. What are some of the motivating factors for the interest in auctions?
Thanks, Leslie. As you mentioned, traditionally, auction platforms have catered to investors who are looking to purchase properties to enhance their portfolios. But we're seeing a shift now in buyers now, everyday buyers, wanting to buy on the auction platform. And I think the appetite for buying on the auction platform for everyday buyers is going to be increasing. Now that the foreclosure moratoriums have lifted, I think more properties are going to become available on auction platforms. These properties that are coming through foreclosure are great value for some everyday buyers. Also, the Federal Housing Administration just announced last month a new rule that's really going to help everyday buyers purchase properties without having to compete with these investors. This new rule allows auction companies to offer for sale for 30 days properties that can only be purchased by owner-occupants, government agencies, and nonprofits. This means that they won't have to compete with those investors who traditionally have really bid up the price of these properties. So I think, as the survey found, really there's this appetite for buyers to purchase at auction. 72% said that they find that it's going to be a good value. There's some good deals to be had on the auction platform, and a lot of them are going to be looking to do that. They also found in this survey that the buyers really like the ability to bid remotely and online. So it's a great platform for these buyers in the future. Great alternative path to home ownership.
Are they buying primary residences, or is there another reason for buying properties this way? What is their motivation?
Yeah, the report found really 3 reasons why buyers are buying at auction. The main use of the properties is really for primary residence. We also found that some savvy investors are looking to fix and flip the property, meaning that they're going to buy the property, do some minimal repairs, and sell the property at a nice profit. And then finally, some of these millennials are purchasing these properties as a source of rental income. Airbnb has become very popular, and I think that platforms like Airbnb and other rental management type platforms have made it easier for buyers to purchase these properties as a source of rental income and manage it in a more efficient manner. So they're looking for that opportunity as well.
Excellent. And then the report also, we know that down payments has been the main roadblock for home ownership for many first-time home buyers. What can lenders do to educate potential borrowers about assistance programs that may be available to them? Maybe, Tony, you would like to start us off with this one.
Sure, Leslie. There are a number of resources that can help lenders help their clients, particularly in today's competitive environment when you look at the first-time home buyer market. Amongst those are down payment assistance programs that are normally provided within every city, state, or county in which a borrower is located in. They would have access to assist with down payment, which will help with closing costs, a rate reduction, as well as providing funds for just the allocation of closing costs to help support the purchase of that home. Sometimes there are areas that lenders and or the borrowers themselves may not know that they may qualify for, and these down payment assistance programs oftentimes are not income based. They're based on where the purchase is being bought at in terms of the location within that particular city or municipality. And so for us, what we try to do at NAB is help lenders to understand that they can educate their borrowers that there are additional alternative sources of down payment assistance, because we know one of the number one or number two barrier to home ownership, particularly with millennials in communities of color, is the down payment assistance.
Yeah, Dave, do you agree? Is there more that can be done on the part of lenders to educate the public on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Leslie. The market has responded. They've responded to really what we've seen in research by the National Association of Realtors that published in the first quarter, that in December, 23% of all home purchases were done in cash. Further studies that have been cited have seen that percentage even increase from there. So the market has responded by offering additional alternative methods for first-time home buyers to actually participate in cash transactions. And how those programs work is the buyers will go out and they will get pre-qualified for a traditional mortgage, and then they'll find one of these companies that will front the cash so that they can present their offers as cash offers and be competitive in this environment. And so, a simple search, online will expose that there's a number of these programs out there already. They are, fee-based. They cost money to participate in, but at least it helps a mortgage borrower compete with a cash borrower, which are taking up more and more percentages of the transactions that are out there in the marketplace today.
So let's talk a little bit about how technology is changing and how it can affect the housing market. Dave, let's stay with you. What are some of the advantages for home buyers using digital technology during the home buying process?
Tony mentioned earlier in talking about the research and education process, and that has really been supercharged by technology. If you go back to when we were on lockdown and such in a pandemic, we spent enormous amounts of time online. And what were we doing online as it related to housing? We were researching, we were searching properties, we were getting educated on the process. And all of that has been accelerated and assisted by the development of technology. So that front end of the process, the research and education, has really been enhanced by access and really the amount of time everybody is spending on technology.
And Tony, what would be some of the preferred lending options, seeing that they have all this technological advantages now? What would be some of the preferred lending options for this generation?
Well, certainly when you think about the millennial generation and again, their desire to have their journey and take that consumer journey the way that they want to take it, vis-a-vis the internet, text, email, ultimately being in front of a mortgage advisor or a real estate agent when they feel like there's a need for that. However, one of the most important things that we talk to lenders about at NAMBA is making sure that you understand the customer experience, particularly the borrower in terms of from a segmentation standpoint, because we know that millennials would prefer to have a different experience than a baby boomer per se, Leslie. And so it's great technology that companies like ServiceLink provides to lenders that allows it to make the borrower experience more easy, more transparent, and more efficient, creates at the end of the day a greater, better client experience for the borrower, which also relates to additional referrals from that potential borrower as well.
Yeah, Leslie, if I could jump on that just for a second more, when we get back to the drivers and what's kind of motivating them. As Tony said, it's really about convenience, efficiency, speed, and transparency. And technology is really contributing to lenders' ability to provide those levers to the millennial generation in a manner that they want to consume, because they're very highly technical, highly tech-savvy borrower base that are going to be looking for those outcomes, but leaning on those tools in order to be able to buy and participate in the home buying process in a manner that they want to.
What are some of the specific things that lenders can do to better engage with millennial buyers then?
So what they have to do is they have to meet them where they are. And so and Tony mentioned earlier that we're talking about building trust at the front end of the relationship. And so the lenders today have got to be building trust when those buyers are prospects early on when they're out there shopping. Our technology environment today has enabled them to cover so much more ground than they've been able to cover in years past in terms of research. That also means access to lenders and competition for lenders out there in the marketplace. So the ones that are captive or captivating to this population out there and what they offer to either assist, educate, or help them research are going to stand out and start that journey of building trust with them as a lender as they go further on the continuum of their buying journey.
What are some of the emerging technologies that will impact the home buying process moving forward, and how can they benefit the buyer?
A couple of the technologies that we're seeing have more prevalence in our space and that were exposed in our survey are really ones that are more kind of newer to the mortgage lending continuum. It's how they're adapted to the process. So e-signing, e-signature has been out there for a while. It's getting more traction in our space, as well as the use of video, both for capturing of data and capturing data of properties that's then ingested into other parts of the lending process, but also in the buyer's research journey as well. 37% cited in our survey, 37% of millennial buyers did a virtual tour of their property before actually potentially doing a physical tour or even using that to eliminate them. Their desire to eliminate paperwork has driven more investigation into e-signing and e-signature solutions. And it also reduces the error rates when we're using these types of technologies in the lending process in terms of physical paper getting lost or damaged or signatures getting missed. A lot of that gets, a lot of those opportunities for errors get factored out when we're leveraging technology in those ways.
Tony, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yes, Leslie, I think, just to really reinforce a couple points that both Marion made with the adoption of millennials really looking at being open to purchasing homes through the auction process, as well as a point that Dave made in regards to looking at how easy we're making the transaction for millennials as it relates to e-signature, as it relates to being able to communicate with lenders and the real estate professionals, how those millennials want to be communicated. And what we've seen is ultimately that for the millennial generation, lenders need to truly begin to look at their technology platform and from a customer experience standpoint, ask the question, are we making it very easy and simple for millennial borrowers, which are going to be one of our biggest cohort of buyers in the future? Are we making it really easy and simple for them to understand the process as well as for them to go through the process?
So true. And we've mentioned the auctions being more popular online. With the growing popularity of those online auction platforms and mobile apps, Miriam, do you think purchasing a home at auction will become another normal path to home ownership, especially among the more tech-savvy generation?
Absolutely, Leslie. I think that the auction platforms are really tailor-made to what the millennials are looking for. They can bid online. There's some great remote bidding technology available to them. And that, coupled with all of the digital closing platforms that we've been discussing, really are going to be very attractive to this generation. And I think, as mentioned by Tony, I think, more education would be helpful in this area. I think it would drive additional purchases on the auction platform. But like any other platform we've been discussing, just, being made aware of the tools available for purchasing online would be helpful to this generation.
For right now, how can lenders compete more effectively in a market where the number of potential home buyers has decreased?
Hey, Leslie, I'll take that one. Yeah, so really right now with the market kind of slowing, as you mentioned, they're really going to have to differentiate where this buying segment finds value. So from our perspective, we're leaning into the technology enablement of manual process and partnering with our lenders in order to accelerate that, because they're going to have to differentiate themselves. It's going to be harder to come by business. And so they'll need to be working towards making their processes more efficient, more effective, more transparent, and more convenient. And that all speaks to a technology-driven investment in order to speak to this generation of buyers. And the time to do that, and the time they have to invest in those areas, is typically when the market is slower and they're not overrun with volume and overrun with activity. So it's challenging because resources are being shifted and being redirected within lending institutions, but it also means that it becomes more important to streamline processes with technology enablement, because when it does pick back up again, the most efficient lenders who are speaking to buyers in the way that they want to be spoken to are going to be able to attract those customers and pick up on those scarce opportunities that are out there today.
And Leslie, I think it's important also that lenders recognize that the old textbook or old playbook for how do you market to consumers is really out the window, given the post-pandemic environment that we're in terms of that radically change how consumers search and how they have created a new preference for purchasing products and services. And so for lenders, it's really important that they truly understand, educate before they can engage with that borrower, particularly when you talk about millennials and Gen Z, because a lot of their decision making is built on the front end through the education and awareness piece that they do. So the more lenders can understand how to connect with this audience in new areas and vehicles in terms of like Instagram, like YouTube, like looking at, again, where millennials like to a certain extent do their online preference in terms of shopping, that is really going to be very important in terms of getting to the consumer to help them understand that they're there to be able to help them purchase a home.
Yeah, Leslie, if I could jump on this point just a little bit more. Tony was mentioning the borrowers and the borrowers themselves. There are other people who participate in the ecosystem that the lenders need to be thinking about. They need to be thinking about how are they going to access the various service providers, the independent service providers that are out there in the marketplace that are part of the lending continuum, and to do that in a technology-driven way. Will help drive efficiency for them when they're reducing resources and having to re-engineer processes because of that. And so what we're seeing is a bit of disintermediation of access to that population base that's making it more efficient and more effective to use technology as a single layer to get after all of those resources out there, whether they're closing resources, appraisal resources, or the like, from a single technology platform in order to manage them in that process. And so you've got the borrowers on one end, and then you've got all of the service providers at the other end, and we've really got to enhance that access through technology in order to make it more efficient in a lower volume environment where costs are being restricted in terms of what they can invest to manage the lending originations.
Are there any quick steps or specific technologies that lenders should be looking into at this moment that you might be able to mention?
Well, there's been an uptick of interest in scheduling capabilities and scheduling enablement. I mentioned e-signatures and video capture as well for data capture for the property for appraisers. A lot of activity going on there in appraisal modernization with the GSEs and with providers. We've seen an uptick in digital capabilities towards creating a single efficient and effective process around closing, getting closings scheduled quicker with more certainty and certainty of providers. That has been an area where we've seen a lot of acceleration, that lenders are looking to create a consistent digital experience there for their borrower base, as well as the others we've mentioned before. And certainly where Miriam has mentioned is the increase in interest around auction for end borrowers and end consumers as well has been tremendous in velocity for us.
Miriam, I don't know if you wanted to add something.
No, absolutely. We're seeing as I mentioned, the appetite for all of these technologies growing, and we as an industry need to be able to respond to that demand.
That's very true. That's very true. It's always an adapting market. Finally, Tony, you mentioned before the role of TikTok in the millennial generation getting their information on home buying and the housing market. How has the role of social media changed over the past 2 years? Not only TikTok, but some other social media platforms.
Yes, Leslie, what we've seen, again, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of focus for lenders and borrowers to really have that in-person transaction. Although we know that social media is continuing to grow and most people are more comfortable with making their purchases with social media, there was a fast forwarding of that once the pandemic hit, because there was literally no choice but to use social media and the internet to do a lot of your research. And so what we've seen from the millennial generation is that this preference, which was already a preference for them from a consumer buying perspective, they really wanted less interaction with individuals and peer-to-peer, and more interaction with researching online, looking at tools and resources that they could utilize themselves first to understand that process. And so where this becomes very important is to understand that as the millennial generation continues to be a very strong purchasing force for homes in the future, lenders will need to understand that it is important for them to create marketing platforms, marketing content that will resonate with them, one, in terms of an education perspective, but then what we've also found is that from an ethnicity standpoint, the journey of a Latino or an African American or LGBTQ millennial borrower will need to be radically different in terms of how they are marketed to, how they are engaged, and how they are educated about the home buying process. And that is going to be, again, a new paradigm shift for lenders to begin to understand if they are going to really connect and engage with this market and quite honestly, Leslie, get their fair share of the market. They will need to look at multicultural marketing to a certain degree because we recognize that this journey for each one of those millennial segments are very different, including single females.
And just to follow up on that, and this, Tony, feel free to answer, but also Dave and Miriam, if you want to chip in, go ahead as well. So how can lenders adapt to such different markets? Because LGBTQ is going to have some concerns. Latinos are going to have different concerns. So how can lenders adapt to such different markets?
Well, first of all, I would encourage lenders to start thinking about adapting to those marketplaces, because we've heard from both the regulators, we've heard from, industry as a whole that says in order for us to truly grow, we know that we have to service women, millennials, communities of color, the LGBT community. We have to do a better job of doing that. And quite honestly, we don't know how. That's where certainly NAMBA and Cultural Outreach, which is the industry's premier multicultural marketing firm, comes in. But the first point that lenders will need to think about, Leslie, according to a survey we did last year, 85% of marketing firms within organizations are white. And so first we need to think about diversifying and bringing onto their staffs individuals that represent these cohorts, that are from the LGBT community, that are from Latino, Asian, and other ethnicities, that can help provide different perspectives as well as an understanding of different culture nuances. The second important thing that lenders really need to begin to certainly look at as part of their sales practices is making sure that they are representing these communities in not only just their marketing content, but how that content is presented, what that content says in terms of when they're marketing to these different ethnic groups, so that they can truly build and establish trust. Goes back to what we said earlier. Only 28% of millennials who purchase a home in a survey that we did last year said at the end of the day, after that transaction, after they had moved into their home, that they actually trusted the lender did the best thing in terms of operating in their best interest.
If I could add, Tony, here, I think as a service provider, ServiceLink is very focused on its diversity and inclusion programs, specifically for that reason that you mentioned, to have representation for those buyers within our company as well. I think that's an important initiative for us as well.
Yeah, very, very much so, Miriam. Good point there. The market and the demographics are going that way. And Miriam mentioned earlier the percentage of millennials who make up the buying market today. I think it was 43%, Miriam, what you might have mentioned.
Oh,
It's
yes.
only going to increase. Lenders who are able to address that market and the subsegments that Tony was talking about are going to be the ones who win. We are seeing that from some progressive lenders out there in the space who are trying to get in front of that, both in engaging with us on supplier diversity, but as well as them in how they're going to market and trying to reach these populations. So it's really, really an important thing that's going to separate the successful institutions in the future from ones who are going to, quite frankly, struggle to reach this market.
So that's very true, very true. We're getting close to the end of our discussion. This has been a great conversation so far. We do have a couple of minutes to take some questions from the audience. So let's start off with our first question. How can those who still want to buy a home this year counteract the affordability challenge posed by higher rates? Miriam, would you like to tackle this one?
Absolutely, Leslie. And that is a huge challenge for these buyers. Although the demand for housing is starting to wane a little bit, we see that the demand really continues to greatly exceed the supply of homes. A statistic that I'm aware of is that there's 2 million homes, a shortage of 2 million homes out there. So that's going to continue to cause this affordability challenge. As Tony had mentioned, federal and state regulators are working to take steps to offer payment assistance programs, which is going to be very helpful to these homeowners. But I think really to counteract the affordability challenge, these buyers are really going to have to rethink the type of home that they're buying and make some concessions about the home that they're purchasing. Maybe they can purchase a fixer-upper, put some sweat equity into the property, or maybe with the fact that there is such a large remote workforce now, they have to rethink their geographic boundaries and start looking for homes in less desirable areas, or maybe even moving out of state. But they will need to make some concessions, I think, to tackle this affordability challenge.
True. Tony or Dave, is anything you would like to add to that?
Leslie, I think Mary made two good points that lenders can help millennial buyers particularly understand and look at the market. We know that for a millennial buyer, this will not be their last home. And so therefore, when you think about where are some of the best opportunities to purchase a home and or purchase a property that may need renovation that in 3 to 4 years could be sold for a nice profit or for a move-up borrower, this is where lenders can help the millennial buyer understand that there are hidden gems, as I call it, in many communities, whether it's the urban core or even in some of the suburban areas, that they can potentially look at that may not be exactly ideal in terms of all the things that they want from a lifestyle standpoint. But when you think about getting in to this housing buyer market today, it provides them an entry point, and it allows them to be able to capitalize on the value that will be built over time in those up and coming markets, as we call them, that they will then be able to sell that home at a nice profit and move into their next home a couple of years down the road.
Yeah, Leslie, I think the points that Miriam and Tony have made here are really just spot on. If you look at what were the motivating factors for millennials, parents and grandparents in owning a home, that was a 30, 40, 50 year investment, right? They bought a home, they stayed there, for their lives, they raised their families there. But as Miriam was mentioning about, needing to make concessions potentially about location, and Tony mentioned about investing for the future and it not being the only home they're going to ever own, the likelihood of that, and the fact that they're going to have to be mobile, or people are more mobile today in terms of where they're seeking employment and their willingness to move or their willingness to work remote. I think all of that factors in together to really put a spotlight on what it's going to take in either a rising rate or a higher competitive environment to get into that home. It's a step more than a step along their life's journey instead of a destination and an endpoint.
True. We have our next question, second question. Tony, I think this one you can start us off with. How can lenders help narrow the affordability gap between minority and white home buyers?
Great question, Leslie. And so, again, one of the things that we go back to is lenders first need to understand that when you look at communities of color, when you look at millennial borrowers and you look at the LGBT community, over the next 5 years, there's a $2.9 trillion market opportunity for purchase originations. So again, a $2.9 trillion market opportunities. However, it is going to be important for lenders to understand the approach to connect and engage with each one of these segments, as we mentioned earlier, will have to be radically different than how they have marketed to the consumer in the past. More specifically, it is going to entail and engage more awareness and outreach in terms of education about the home buyer process and what it takes to get a mortgage and what that process is to establish and build trust. And then the second part is making sure that as they engage with each of these cohorts and these different segments of the marketplace, they're creating within their organization processes as well as programs that will support and create a great experience for each of these segments at the end of their transaction. And for lenders that can start that process today, they will be really far ahead of the competition over the next 2 to 3 years as it relates to engaging and getting business from this cohort of buyers.
True. Dave or Miriam, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, so that cohort of buyers, from our primary research is looking for greater convenience. 24% of them looking for more transparency. We think that that's going to require, investment in technologies and streamlined processes to deliver those experiences for them, so that these lenders can be successful in those addressing the needs of that market.
Perfect. Our last question here coming in is, Dave, let's start. Let's keep you on this one, and then Miriam and Tony, feel free to jump in if you want to. How can lenders build trust? Are they doing the right thing for their borrower? How can they build trust among potential clients?
I think there's been a lot that's been mentioned here throughout the session today on how they can do that, but it's really kind of coming forward in the journey, right? So addressing kind of where Tony was going earlier on with their role in education and their role in knowing who they're speaking to related to the demographics of the potential buyer. It's going to be that recognition and delivering value through education that's really going to help them build that trust in the long haul, so that we can drive that percentage that Tony mentioned earlier after loan closing, where he said I think 28% of the millennial borrowers that he had surveyed found that they trusted their lender after closing. They need to that number needs to raise up, and the way you do that, or the way that I believe we've outlined that needs to be done, is by addressing the education on the front to build that trust in providing access to the programs that can help them along the way, and through technology enablement, more transparency, communication, and convenience for them as well will hopefully lead to a higher trust score on the back end.
Thank you, Dave. As we wrap up, I want to thank each of our experts panelists. We certainly appreciate all of your insights on many of the topics. I hope this conversation has been informative and insightful, and particularly for those who are on the front lines working to best serve this powerful Gen Z millennial generation. All the key findings that we covered today and plenty more can be found in the 2022 State of Home Buying Report. We've made it easy for you to access that information. A link can be found in the resources widget at the bottom of your screen. Thanks again for your participation, and I hope you all have a great day.